This is your government video for civil rights and civil liberties. We're going to first start off with definitions of these two things. A lot of times students get them confused, and they are fairly similar. The first term is civil liberties. The word liberty basically means freedom. So when we're referring to civil liberties, we're talking about the rights that you are awarded in the Constitution. This is typically in the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. For example, like right to freedom of speech and right to counsel. But these are things that are awarded to you. Remember that the Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution in order to protect you from federal government. So the original Bill of Rights gave you these liberties so that the federal government could not infringe upon them. Civil rights, however, are protections you're given by the government when people are discriminating against you or treating you differently than somebody else. So the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution bans the federal government from restricting your civil rights. It says that you cannot be denied due process of the law. So the government can't infringe upon your rights unless you have gone through a trial, which is a process, and been proven guilty. And then, of course, they could put you in jail. There's also other things like they can give you a speeding ticket. But remember, the original Bill of Rights only protected you from federal government because the anti-federalists were really afraid that the federal government was going to become tyrannical. So they made an agreement with the Federalists to add those in. It wasn't until later that we realized that state governments were also being really restrictive with people's rights. So after the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are passed. The 14th Amendment has a clause in it called the Equal Protection Clause, and there's also a clause called the Due Process Clause. In the 14th Amendment, they start saying states cannot deny rights of equal protection of laws or due process. And since the Civil War, the Supreme Court has had to go back in and selectively incorporate parts of the original amendments of the Constitution to state governments. So the Supreme Court's job is deciding what the actual words in the Constitution mean when executed in law. The words are very general, they're very short, and the interpretation of what that means is different based upon how state legislatures and federal legislators write laws, how judges in lower courts interpret that particular law. And so over time, depending upon who is on the Supreme Court, how that is interpreted can change. Their basic plan is to make sure that there's balance. You have individual rights and liberties, and the Constitution guarantees you those. But the federal government and state governments also have to protect you. So they have to protect the safety and security of the country. So the Supreme Court is trying to balance those two things. They never want to always give you your individual rights or always side with the government in protecting the security of the country. There's a fine line in between. And again, the line does move slightly depending upon who is on the court. So in general, you can believe whatever you want. You have all sorts of rights to believe ideas that are, let's say, not popular. You can believe in, you can practice a religion that's not popular. You can believe in racist or prejudices and things like that. It is when you take action on those things that the government can restrict what you're doing. So, for example, if you believe in the right to own a weapon, which is your Second Amendment right, you can do that. But the minute you start using your weapon to harm yourself or others, you can be arrested. Even if you actually haven't harmed anybody, if you're threatening to harm somebody and people think that those threats are real, if you're restricting the rights of others, using your own rights to restrict or harm the rights of others, and of course, if they think that you could potentially restrict the rights of others. So let's say that the government thinks that you are plotting to steal money from your company, and they have some evidence that you have been working to move money around from accounts and transferring them to your bank account. They can, of course, then start to restrict your rights by getting warrants to listen to your phone calls, to follow you around, and of course, ultimately take you to trial to see if they can prove that you're guilty. So here are some other, just kind of crazy examples that I brought up, you have the right to freedom of religion in the First Amendment. And let's say that you believe in a religion which sacrifices babies. This is obviously not popular. You have the right to believe that religion is legitimate. You just cannot practice this specific part of your religion. You cannot exercise that particular portion of the religion. Let's say that you have a right to privacy from the government, but if they believe that you are a danger to society, if they believe that you are planning some type of bombing, as an example, then of course they can start to restrict your rights, arrest you, and put you on trial. So for active learning number 3, I want you to do this on your active learning paper. We're going to start talking about the freedom of religion. So take a look at these questions. This is about where you think the wall of separation between church and state should be. Should there be no relationship at all between any religions whatsoever and any form of government? How much religion? What if we give tax breaks to religious organizations? What if a religious organization is also a nonprofit? Should they be tax exempt? What about a religious organization that's also a school? Should they be able to get access to money for education purposes? What about governments offering religious holidays for businesses? What about religious symbols on government buildings? So take a second and do these on your paper.